So for our contrastive analysis, we picked the Korean language. So the origin and history of the Korean language. Korean is most likely a distant relative of the Ural-Altaic family of languages, which includes Mongolian, Finnish, and Hungarian. Linguistically, Korean is unrelated to Chinese, but is very similar to Japanese. Presbyterian and Roman Catholic schools taught Kungmun, its new name, to Korean students because it was easier to learn than Hanja in 1880s. In 1936, diligent scholars from Korean Language Research Society began working to preserve Hunmin Jeongeum. They developed Hangul, meaning Korean writing, and it was both Hanja and the Hunmin Jeongeum combined. After World War II, it became the normal writing system, and Hanja was used for only academics. Now the writing system. Korea's written language exists in three parts: Hangul, which is the modern alphabet; Hanja, which is the body of Chinese characters incorporated into Korean. It is also the oldest writing system in Korea. And the Myeolbet-gul is the Western alphabet used for road signs, train schedules, and other newspapers, magazines, things like that. Hanja is an adaptation of Chinese pictographs, symbols that depict ideas, not sounds. It is usually used for the language of government and business. There was a time when only high social classes could be able to write because the alphabet was too hard to learn. Because of this, in 1440, King Sejong, the fourth monarch of the Yi dynasty, devised a method of writing suitable for every single class, not just the upper class. So Hunmin Jeongeum are the correct sounds for the instruction of the people. A simple alphabet of 28 characters, so there are 17 consonants and 11 vowels. Characters are stacked and combined into groups of 2 to 5 to create syllables. They are grouped together from left to right to form words, full words. Higher class citizens and the literati, who are educated scholars that like literature and are educated in literature, opposed the new script, but they also hated and feared it. They called it vulgar script and would not use it. So for dialects and regions, the northeastern dialects is spoken in northeast provinces, and they only use 8 vowels. The northwestern dialects are spoken in northwest provinces, and they're only known total Korean language. Central dialects are spoken in cities such as Seoul and Kaesong. Gangwon dialects are spoken in North Korean provinces and east of the Taebaek Mountains. Southeastern dialects are spoken in the cities of Daegu, Busan, and Ulsan. So the pitch is varied, and they only have 6 vowels. The southwestern dialect is spoken in Jeolla province, and it has 10 vowels. And the Jeju language is spoken in the southwest coast of South Korea, and that has 9 vowels and additional consonants. Because of Hangul, Koreans have been free of unintelligible dialects for over 600 years, and for this, it's making Koreans one of the most literate people on earth. So there's over 98%.
Phonology is the study of sounds in a language. So the Korean language is a syllable-timed language, meaning individual word stress is not as important, where that's the case in English. So Korean has 3-way phonemic distinction for plosive sounds, which are sounds that stop airflow: unaspirated lenus, unaspirated fortis, and aspirated. The final letter in a Korean consonant is not aspirated, whereas in English it is. For an example, with the word hip. Korean language has 2 phonemic dental fricatives, which differ in their intensity, so the Korean spelling also matches its pronunciation. Here is a picture of a little chart, so Hangul, which is the Korean alphabet, the Y romanization, so the word that they're saying, the phonemic sound, and the gloss, so the word that you are saying. Some common English pronunciation problems that you may see in your classroom are adding the I sound before or after consonants. So this is like the I sound. So words like ink and pink. It affects the learner's speech. Another problem you might run into is they might substitute central vowels, the k or an R sound. Learners may often pronounce the AE sound, which is like hat, as like hat or heat. Their jaw will not open as wide, and they will not keep their tongue low with words like hat, cat, or apple. Instead of placing their tongue at the roof of their mouth, their tongue actually goes between their teeth, and they make the sound. So the R sound does not exist in the Korean language, so learners oftentimes have trouble pronouncing it. Same with the Z sound. It does not exist in the Korean language, so learners may pronounce it as an S sound. So words like xylophone, they might pronounce as xylophone. Consonants F and V are pronounced as B, the B sound, and there's a lot of confusion between the P and F sounds. They are similar. Now with morphology, which is the study of words and how they are formed, Hangul is the modern name for the alphabet. There's 24 letters in the Korean alphabet. It consists of 14 consonants and 10 vowels, whereas in the English alphabet, there are 26 letters. So the Korean letters are actually combined into syllable blocks, and the shapes of the vowels are based on 3 elements: a man, vertical line, the earth, horizontal line, and the heaven, a dot. In their alphabet, the heavenly dot has mutated to a very short line, so that is something to think about too. Shapes of the consonants of the letters G and K, N, S, M, and G are graphical representations of the speech organs used to pronounce them. So other consonants are created by adding extra lines to the basic shapes. And down here you can see the picture of how each letter is spelled or written. So the sounds of some consonants change depending on whether they appear at the beginning, middle, or end of the syllable. So that is a key rule to think about. In the Korean language, oftentimes they use one instead of a. So in the sentence, they might say Mary had 1 glass of milk rather than saying Mary had a glass of milk. Now onto syntax, which is the structure and form of words to create a sentence. The Korean word order is subject, adjective, object, verb, whereas in English the word order is subject, verb, adjective, and then object. So proper spacing in the Korean language is just as important as like English punctuation is. In the Korean language, in a written sentence, if there's one spacing error, it can totally change the whole meaning of the sentence, even if it may seem like a very minor change. It could have a totally different meaning. When conjugating verbs in the future tense, a space goes between the verb and its ending. And a lot of the words were actually borrowed from the Chinese, so they're kind of similar. Korean pronouns don't have gender, so this is something to think about with children in your classroom. Like feminine, masculine words aren't a thing, so that is something that you will have to teach them and understand in the English language. And Korean has postpositions instead of prepositions, so instead of them saying in Korean, it is said as Korea. Sentences without first and second person subjects are also allowed, as long as the subject is implicit in the discourse.
I'll be giving an overview of how elements in the Korean language and culture affect semantics, pragmatics, and discourse variety for students learning English. So we start with semantics, which is the meaning of words, phrases, and sentences. One of the ways we might see difficulty with this for Korean students would be in the connotative meaning of vocabulary words. So in comparison to Spanish-speaking students learning English who have cognates to pull from and common root words between languages, Korean students don't have that because the Korean language comes from a different language family tree. So this may be more difficult for them. They may need more scaffolding and more support. And then although Koreans do use idiomatic and figurative language, it may be difficult to understand these devices in English because they're culturally specific. So a student may not understand an idiom like don't cry over spilled milk, or when we use figurative language like irony, metaphors, oxymorons. So pragmatics is the meaning of language as we use it in social context. So this would be the implications, the intentions, the communication strategies, and the social appropriateness of how we communicate. So pragmatic competence in a target language is really important for students to be able to socially and culturally appropriately communicate. So for Korean students, this can be affected by honorifics. So in Korean, speakers have a complex system called honorifics of hierarchical, relational, social positions that dictate and express that social distance between the speaker and the listener. So these charts show how far-reaching the system of honorifics is in the Korean language, and we really don't have an equivalent in English. So students are struggling to find a balance with this. So beyond honorifics, Americans use more direct speech acts, and Korean students would use more indirect speech acts. And we have this concept of the high versus low context culture and collectivism versus individualism. So I'm going to talk about these a little bit more because this really affects pragmatics and how students learn English. So Korea is a high context collectivist culture. So this means that what is not said can carry as much weight or more weight than what is said. So they prefer implicit messaging within context. So for example, the Korean concept of nunchi, which translates as eye measure, is the subtle art of gauging others' moods. And this reflects positively on the speaker and the person because you are understanding what is not spoken. So Korean students also dislike direct expression. The speech can go around the point and does not even need to necessarily be verbalized. They view their self in connection to others, so they define themselves in their relation to other people, and they give others face priority when conflicts arise. So politeness and public image take precedence over your own message or what you're trying to say. So quickly, America is a low-context, individualist culture that relies on explicit verbal communication. We're much more straightforward. We dislike ambiguous expressions. Our speech is more direct, and we define ourselves really based on our own personal traits rather than in relation to others. So the impact of all of this on pragmatics in the classroom would be you would see things like silence or a smile being used as an apology instead of a direct apology. A low tone of voice may be a sign of respect, not a lack of confidence. Indirect speech patterns can seem repetitive to teachers, so you have to understand that students may know they're just sort of talking around a point. Praise can be unwelcome, and students can use vague terms like some or any, even if they know the specific details, due to trying to be more inclusive and indirect. Beyond that, we have students volunteering less information, social distance and social status between speakers affecting those requests and interactions, so teachers need to pay attention to that. Korean students may say "are" instead of "my." Even though they know something is theirs, they use a collectivist pronoun to show that relationship between themselves and everyone else. And they address people by their relation. So instead of saying you or somebody's name, they might say Jane's father or the teacher's brother. So discourse varieties in the classroom could be affected, for example, through writing style. So a Korean student's writing style may be much more circuitous than we're used to seeing. They may talk around the main point instead of stating a topic sentence and specific evidence. So that is something they could use scaffolding on, maybe graphic organizers or more support to learn that system of just being more direct with their writing. So this website on the bottom of the slide is a great website that explains 6 important cultural concepts in Korea that we don't have direct equivalents for in English or American culture. They affect pragmatics and discourse for Korean students learning English because these are concepts that sort of infuse their relationships and how they relate to everyone. So if you are interested, I recommend looking at that.
The Korean language is influenced by Confucian heritage. So as a result, students don't believe in communicating openly with teachers, and they very rarely contradict their teachers publicly. Instructors in Korea usually exhibit less immediate behaviors than instructors in the United States. So those are things like getting close to the student, putting your hands on their shoulder, or anything that invades what would be considered personal space, according to Confucian heritage. Confucian principles state that respect and obedience to teachers and elders is a cardinal rule of communication. So as such, eye contact is considered very rude when speaking, especially when speaking to a teacher or someone that is older than you. So students usually look down and to the side when they are talking to teachers. Social class is also a crucial part of education in Korea, so you should not be surprised when Korean students ask their peers about their social standing, or even if they ask you about your social class. They're also expected to suppress any emotions, and that is especially in school. So they will very rarely express emotions. Outbursts would be very rare, and they don't usually feel comfortable answering open-ended questions because that involves them using their emotions and their own feelings about things to respond. And in their culture, they're not acceptable, and they usually lead to confusion when they are used with students who are here from Korea. So to avoid that, really, you need to give explicit instructions if you are going to give open-ended questions and help students who are from Korea understand the purpose of those, and that it's not necessarily looking for them to include their emotions, it's just asking for them to give their understanding of something. To an American, questions regarding age, money, marital status, and religion are pretty much considered off limits. If a student asks you that, you might answer it, but most parents would tell their children that you should not be asking your teacher or any adults that. I think the cliche is usually that don't ask women their age specifically. But in Korea, this is considered a necessary question to decide on the appropriate language and behavior that you should be using, because as I said before, eye contact is forbidden only with people who you should be showing respect to, and social class is crucial. So even if you are older than them, if in social class you are considered lower than them, they're going to use different language than they would be using for someone who is above them in social class and also in age. So you should not be surprised if they ask you those questions. Participation is rare unless they are specifically called on. This again goes with questioning the teachers. It is considered rude to participate and voluntarily raise your hand because they believe that the teacher should be providing most of the instruction. Therefore, silence is emphasized, and asking any questions is rude as well. So if students are confused, which would be a problem likely for beginner Ls, they will not ask. So it is crucial that a teacher specifically asks them if they are confused so that they will express what they are confused on. Another disparity between Korea and America is that all published material in Korea is considered public domain. Nothing is off limits. Plagiarism is not something that they teach in school. So a teacher here, if they do assign a paper that involves research, should be explicitly reviewing what plagiarism is in America, how to go about researching and citing sources, and why we do that here. One of the big parts of Korea and being part of the Confucian heritage is that families feel shame based off of the student's academic performance, and students usually feel inadequate when they receive low grades. This is especially crucial for students who are new to the country because they will likely be struggling academically at first, especially with grade level content because they don't speak the language. So it is very important to talk to families about this so that they do not feel like it's bringing shame to their family name. So these are some classroom tips. I already mentioned some of them briefly in previous slides, but just some general tips. Call on Korean students directly to gauge their knowledge base. Don't expect students to raise their hand. They will very likely not raise their hand on their own. Do not interpret them looking away from you as them not paying attention. This is their way of showing that they are respecting you. You need to teach students explicitly to cite sources to avoid plagiarism. You need to work with families and students to avoid the negative emotions associated with imperfect grades and to help them understand that it is not a lack of knowledge necessarily as much as it is just the language barrier that they can overcome. Also need to be understanding of questions that might seem inappropriate in our culture because this is how Koreans decide how to communicate with other people. They ask the questions that here are considered off limits to judge whether they should be using proper language or if they can be using more informal language. Based off of that, students will also communicate with their peers differently. So they likely will ask the same sort of questions to their peers, and they may talk to their peers differently. So it may need to be explained to them that you cannot talk to your peers in specific ways just based off of their social class. You should also avoid making physical contact with students. Things like putting your hand on their shoulders might be very off-putting to them. That's not something that happens in their culture, and it can cause a shell shock for them if they come here and they have a teacher who is constantly doing that. And this goes very well with the expressing emotions. Students should not be asked to express their emotions in front of the class. This is something students will need to learn to do over a span of time because it is very discouraged in Korea. They expect you to just sit there and listen to the teacher, and the teacher does not ask open-ended questions or questions about how you are feeling.